Hey there, welcome to Why We Roll, a tabletop role-playing game design podcast.
We're your hosts, Chris Pickett, creator of the historical fantasy game Danse Macabre, and Wythe Marschall, creator of the political sci-fi game Stillfleet.
Throughout the show, Chris and Wythe hope to amplify new creative voices. We'll chat with different TTRPG designers, focusing on the world of indie games.
We take a curious approach to game design, working through a range of mechanical and narrative questions that are pertinent to many designers, players, and GMs.
We hope to showcase fresh and even challenging ideas about what makes imagination-based games just so powerful.
Okay, let's find out why we roll.
Hey, what's up, Chris?
Hey, what's up, Wythe?
Here we are. You know, one thing that might be useful is having like a teaser convo that we could use in the stream, just as like a super short intro to the show.
I guess we could talk about some basic design ideas or philosophies that we both like, that we both use.
Yeah. Would you want to do, not to put you on the spot, but like a quick pitch, like what's going on with your game and, you know, some of the design things you've been thinking about, things that have been fun, things that have been...
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so I'm working on Danse Macabre, which is, I don't really like the term, but it is a Souls-like tabletop RPG game. It is specifically designed for one player and one GM, and uses basically just pretty simple dice pool mechanics to, you know, resolve any kind of check or any kind of action that the player might take that has a risky outcome. It's set in kind of semi-historical 14th century Europe, France specifically, right after the Great Plague, after the pestilence. Death has abandoned the world. So you're working in a time where whenever a person, and kind of working this out, but possibly animals too. But whenever something dies, they reanimate within a short period of time. But every time they come back corrupted. So it has a huge table of D666 mutations, which are called corruptions in the game. So I think it's 216 different possible permutations of that. And the more corrupted that you become, the more close you come to kind of losing your soul or mind, or however the player or GM conceptualizes it. And that's kind of the way that the player can actually die in the game, is that you don't die, but you just become another monster in the landscape. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of the basic concept of the game. You know, the reason that I wanted to do it as one player and one GM is that it's meant to be a pretty intimate conversation about death, will to live, will to death, things like that, especially in a world where everything has kind of gone topsy-turvy and where things weren't that great to begin with, in terms of like political economy and in terms of, you know, access to healthcare and all that kind of stuff. So it weaves in a lot of kind of Catholic eschatology, as well as medieval, something akin to historicity, while also like looking at a really dark setting.
No, I love that. And I think you could argue, I mean, realism, you know, it's a slightly different meaning in different areas of cultural studies, but, you know, in game terms, we can talk about simulationism. And I think while you can simulate anything, so you could simulate very unrealistic things, and that's kind of interesting too, right? Like, how would magic shoot from your hands or whatever? We don't know in real life, but we can simulate it in the magical physics of a fantasy game. But I think it's interesting to think about simulating realistic issues, like realistic political, economic grind, as well as alongside. And I think that tension is what's interesting about what you're describing. Like, there's a realistic late medieval England vibe with this kind of magical, corrupt, dark, demonic world where death has abandoned Earth, and that actually turns out to be sort of horrible. So I think that tension's super interesting. So I like thinking about that a lot, because I like hard science fiction, but I'm often accused of designing games that are very soft sci-fi, to the point of being called melting or goopy, in terms of their realism. But I like to think there's an underlying baseline, like, but most people are just space peasants, realistically modeled. And the fact that yes, all this other crazy stuff exists. Well, that's because it's a game and it's fun, and why not? It's in our minds.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, it's still fantasy, right? And I mean, I think a part of the beauty of role playing games is that you can do what you want within the world. So I think building out like if you want to have some level of realism, or if you want to have simulation of reality or whatever, that like for me that comes from setting, and that comes from the economies that you put into the game, less so how people interact with the world, because ultimately people are going to do whatever they want to do, whether it's be a murder hobo or whatever else people do in the game.
But I think but what I'm saying, it relates to the mechanics and the setting. I think it's maybe where we align to your point about like, well, what is it that we have in common here, and why are we doing this podcast? It's like, because there's a difference. Like when I love some anime, like I grew up with DBZ and Neon Genesis Evangelion and stuff, but most anime I find is literally impossible to parse. Like I can't parse the emotions I'm supposed to feel, and it just sort of is a meaningless wash of like screaming and color, regardless of genre. It's because everyone is a murder hobo. It's like there are no normal people. There is no attempt at that realism, that grounding. So I think the difference in maybe Danse Macabre and Stillfleet and games like that is, and I'll say that's a critique. I mean, I like Merkborg just fine, I guess, but if everyone is a kind of low level metal, halfway to a zombie already murder hobo, then again, like, well, where's the tension? Like everyone is just a criminal, so who cares? It's like the world of Cormac McCarthy is interesting because most people aren't that. And the heroes, the anti-heroes, are murder hobos in actual, let's say, from somewhere between 1850 and 1950, Texas and Mexico. Yeah. And so the fact that they stand out, and I think that's what I wanted out of Stillfleet, is like you work for the company in space, which is basically evil, and you have to somehow figure out what to do. And you're highly trained, and you have all these amazing powers and architect, restored high-tech weaponry and stuff. Most people are not that. Most people are algae farmers. And I think that makes it much more interesting, because if everyone you meet, you have this anime encounter with, it's like, I don't know. I've just never had that. Like it's possible in life for me to come up with analogs of like doing amazing epic stuff, but that would be the extraordinary, the like rare moments. Whereas like most things, mostly when I go to the bank and like deposit a check, no one jumps out of the bushes and is like, now you've crossed my path finally, and like that would be really difficult. And I don't understand how that would just be an absurd universe. It's like, well, let's play a role playing game where everyone's Jello. It's like, okay, I guess you could, but so anyway, I just in defense of what you're saying, like it's not that I love realism, it's that I love the tension between realism and something else. And the something else is, of course, why we play these games to a large degree. Nobody wants to just role play our shitty lives.
Well, that's been a funny thing that I've been thinking about in Danse Macabre in terms of like, again, political economies and things like that. And to your point, like in the setting that I've chosen for 14th century Europe, it's like the vast majority of people were villeins. They were peasants. They didn't have money. They didn't have property, completely abused, completely like, lumpen proletariat, just fucking down in the mud every single day. And I think in fantasy, a lot of the like heroes that we think about tend to be akin to aristocracy or nobility or something like that, which is something that I really wanted to break away from. And so it's like, in Danse Macabre, you are a villain. You aren't anything special, really, which does kind of go to the Morkborg knave kind of idea, where it's like you're not a hero, you're just a person. But then, like the thing that I've done in the rules that I'm writing is that the player character is called the supplicant, the last supplicant. And the idea is that you've been kind of chosen for this duty to like find death in this deathless landscape. So it's, like you are just a peasant. You're kind of nobody. You might like, there are backgrounds that you can have, different professions like smithing, farming, herbalism, things like that, like actual real world applicable skills. But at the same time, like finding that inroad to being like, oh, you can be a hero even though you're not nobility, you're not aristocracy, which is also, I don't know, it's important to me to like I don't know, find a way to fight the man, So it's like, just don't put people in the position where they already hold power.
Right. That's something we both obviously align on is how what are narrative structures. To use a term of art, where that's the case, where you're somehow fighting power or refusing power, or you have power but you want to give it up or whatever, or you're rising, you're a villain and you must, bring the end to feudalism, right? And that's an interesting question inherently to me, and I think makes games inherently interesting.
Yeah.
And then you can layer on, because I think of, Spire, came out while I was still, like, I'd written Stillfleet but hadn't really published it, and it's like, wow, okay, is in my mind, it's like great minds think alike, right? It's like, here's another game where, in a way, the whole thing is the narrative structure. Like, the setting is cool, whatever, who cares? But
Yeah.
the narrative structure, you can put that anywhere. You are part of the ministry, and you are doing a Maoism, and the colonial oppressors control all of the magic and tech. So yeah, I love how it's working. They're sky whales. It's great. The classes are interesting, but in a way, that's like,
I love a sky whale.
I love a sky whale, but it's like epiphenomenal. You know what I mean? To the actual engine of the game, and I think that's to your point. It's and that's and not to, but I think we can go beyond. Like, Merkborg is fun for a baseline sort of OSR game, but I think it doesn't have, it lacks some of that narrative structure of like, why are you doing anything? It's a world with just no meaning, and I think while the real world is quite bleak, it doesn't actually just completely lack meaning. Like, we can find stuff, like we can fight the man, and whatever. So I think it's partially about like injecting some measure of hope, or like trying to create even the conditions for imagining hope,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. For Danse Macabre, it's like, it's about ascension, and it's about finding that kind of hope. But then it's also, I don't know. Have you ever read Alfred Bester?
No,
that guy?
I don't think so.
He's great. Not hard sci-fi at all, but very fun. I would categorize him as like existentialist sci-fi. But he has this one book called The Star's My Destination, where basically there's this like semi-magical space material called pyre, which I think can be used as like an energy source. It's like a clean energy source kind of thing, but can also be incredibly destructive in the wrong hands. And at the end of the book, the main character finally gets his hands on this semi-magical space rock stuff, and then it just like leaves it with a question where it's like, okay, well, what do you do with that then? It's like, and his kind of answer to that is like, I'm just going to give it to the people and let them do whatever they want with it. Like, it should just be free to access. And I don't know, I think that that's an interesting narrative structure too, that I've been thinking a lot about with Danse Macabre, where it's like the kind of mechanical structure is that you're finding a MacGuffin, memento mori item, which can be like a saint's relic, or it can be a painting, or whatever the GM kind of wants. I have like some guidelines that I've laid out, but I'm not trying to like dictate necessarily what the MacGuffin item is.
It's the Holy Grail, right? It's that kind
It's
of
the Holy Grail. Yeah, it's a quest for the Grail. And then like, I think, I also want to try to make it clear that it's like the player can either use it themselves and die and leave this fucked up world, or they can try to find a way to like gift it to other people, or just like something like that. But I don't know, again, thinking about like structures of power within that, like once you gain that MacGuffin, once you gain that unearthly power, what are you doing with it?
No, I love it, and it's replayable, so it's specific but replayable, which I think is also something that, again, if you look at in parallel, some of your work, games like Spire, and then obviously Stillfleet, and our whole focus has been on this narrative structure of you're doing a job for the company. You also hate the company, so it can go, there's a whole spectrum from you just do the job to you refuse to do the job, to something in the middle where it's a campaign, which is kind of the intent, where you kind of over time begin malingering and lying and building your own base of power, subverting, or there's factions that arise, and that kind of narrative structure I think is fun because it drops the player into a very specific, like, you have a thing you need to do, and so they get interested in it just because that's, players kind of want to be told to some degree, like, let me do something.
It's good to have a goal. It's good to have a focus,
right,
especially when you first start out.
Right, but then to your point, it's like you can kind of be whatever the GM wants. So really, the job could be like kind of a let's say a less controversial. Like, there's a evil space demon who's just killing people, and you have to go fight it. And so then you're just basically playing D&D in space, and that's fine. Or you can get, it can be this hardcore like spy story about different kinds of leftist utopian thought and like what really should happen and resources and how they get distributed. And I think like I love the idea of a kind of grail too. I love object-based stories because I think, especially, frankly, I think when the object really doesn't matter, like when it's really a MacGuffin, it's the Maltese fucking Falcon. I think that's so fun because you, as the GM, to run them, you can make such a big deal out of this thing that the players are never going to get, that doesn't do anything, that doesn't matter, except it matters in as much as like whatever you want to say politically or socially, like somebody wants it.
Yes.
There's something that's happening, and I think that's like a fun tension again, where you don't have to do a lot of prep or like worry about like magic item rules as much as create this feeling of like, yeah, guys, you really need that grail.
Yeah.
So I want to play your game for this reason. I think it'd be really fun to do some play tests.
No, I love MacGuffin items for the same reason, where it can be utterly silly, it can be very impactful, but I mean, ultimately, it's just a symbol about consolidation of power. I think, where it's just like, who holds this thing that everybody wants? Why do they hold it? How do you get your hands on it? Yeah, and there's any number of ways of doing that.
Well, so that's a pretty good intro, I think, to some of the game design topics that we think about. What are some things you're excited to talk about with other game designers? Like, what are some of the reasons, again, why did we decide, okay, let's do this podcast? Even if it's just a mini series, let's say what is the goal?
I mean, I'm also, outside of kind of the bigger picture stuff, I'm always a nerd for the more minute details, and I love mechanics. I love thinking about the ways in which we can take these big picture ideas, but then distill them down into a playable die roll, or even just like, I think sometimes the best games are just role playing without much dice rolling. So like, finding the ways that you kind of translate that is always super interesting to me. Yeah, I think that's one of the main things that I'm pretty excited about, is just hearing about different people's design philosophy about, translating these kind of like bigger picture economies, bigger picture worlds that they want to build out, and how you, again, distill that down into legible, playable, fun mechanics. Because there's also a lot of games that have great ideas but become clunky mechanically, or repetitive mechanically, or just like, it's not fun to play, so
Right, right.
I don't want to engage with it, even if I like the concept, even if I like the setting, even if I like the potential characters that you can build out. I mean, like, not to talk too much shit on Wizards, but that's how I feel about D&D. It's like, even with 5th edition, which
Yep.
is supposed to be very streamlined, there's too much going on, and it doesn't feel that fun to me.
Well, I like a lot of stuff going on, but I agree. Like, in running it a few years, like during the height of COVID, it was like just apparent that because everything in the system's about combat, really, at the end of the day, there's really not a good way to do anything else. So you can roll a d20 all day for non-combat reasons, but you're always just rolling a d20, adding a small number, and it gets more and more complicated. You could do a series of those. They have sort of epicycles they've added to the system to try to make it more about social dynamics and less about combat. But at the end of the day, it's a combat simulator. And if you really want to do that, I guess it works. But like, I don't want to do that. And I think most adults kind of get bored because, among many other reasons, I think there's so many reasons. There's political reasons we can go into, but I think one simple reason is video games do that better. And
do it a lot better.
Things that role-playing games do well are they open up these other ways that we can discuss kind of ourselves and who we want to be and what we want the world to look like. And it just, the idea of just like fighting monsters to gain XP or gold or whatever is so dreadfully boring that I think that is a kind of automatic divide, I think, in these discussions, where it's like, if that's what you want to do, cool. There's many games that do that. Obviously the Dragon game is out there and you could just play that and probably have fun, I guess. I couldn't, but like, people can.
Yeah,
I get that. But I think on this podcast, yeah, I agree. I'm really interested in, like, to your, just what you said. I thought you said it well. How do game designers in general, so us and other people, how do we mechanicalize, narrative structures? How do you mechanicalize political ideas, philosophical ideas, and make them engaging and genuinely fun, and not, a chore or underthought or vague? Like, how do we have tension in the dice rolls? Hence the name of the podcast, right? Why we roll. We're not just doing purely narrative, which, again, not to knock that if that's your thing, but I like a good dice roll.
Always. I mean, I don't know, especially in terms of designing, there's something really nice about figuring out specific percentages and like really trying to like tweak and balance all of that. I don't know. I find that very satisfying. And even though I tend towards simpler systems for dice rolling, like I don't want to make people do too much math. I think that's something that Yochai Gall has said often. He's the creator of Cairn, which is kind of it's a Knave clone, but I think it also takes some stuff from like Into the Odd, like Chris McDowell's work. But like, that's something I remember him saying on Twitter pretty often, where he's like, I don't like doing math that much, and I don't want my players to have to sit there and do arithmetic to figure out whether or not they've hit the monster that they're trying to hit or what, whatever. So yeah, I don't know, always trying to find like simplified ways of doing that still have a lot of tension and a lot of engagement in terms of how the players get into it.
Yeah, and I think some of those, and there, I mean, I like having all the, we have all these options available to us, and it's sort of like maximalism or minimalism
Mm-hmm.
in general, and that might be good also for the show. Is like I like that there's several perfect polyhedra or whatever, and we can use them all. There's also great games where you really just use a D6 or a D20 or whatever, and that's fine.
Yeah.
I think some of it is, to your point, it's like I like to think in Stillfleet it's pretty simple at the end of the day, because while there are different dice types, you're generally just trying to get a 6 or higher, or you're rolling against someone. So like the GM has just rolled and got a whatever 5, a 7, and whatever, that's the number you can get. And because the math you're doing is very simple, you're rolling your dice and you're generally, it's a gambling. The whole game is around a gambling mechanic. So you burn your grit. You can add points to your roll or not, but you only have so many points to add, and that kind of economy, while it is arithmetic, like it's based on constantly doing small amounts of math, it's not, it's never like too crazy. So I think there is a way to sort of have your cake and eat it, I think, on the sort of maximalist side that still preserves that nice interaction you're describing. In a way, we could eventually work out this kind of typology of all these different systems, and I'm sure somebody's tried to write this up somewhere, but it'd be cool to work through it, like dice pools, percentile, just all kinds of stuff, cards. Like I think there's a lot of stuff out there that we're just beginning as a community to really embrace, like that diversity of mechanics, but also, to your point, hey, let's make it not as crazy complicated as traditionally the games have been.
One thing I think that Stillfleet does that really well, where it's thinking about the math, the applied math that players have to do in Stillfleet. It's incremental whenever you're doing it. And I think that the gambling mechanic ups the ante. It drives that tension forward, which I think makes the math that you're doing in those moments more enjoyable than maybe some other games that I could think of. And yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan of percentile dice. I'm also a big fan of dice pools. I think that there's something really fun about them. Rick Priestley, who is a tabletop wargaming designer. He's the guy that designed the original Warhammer, all of that kind of stuff. But yeah, I don't know. Rick Priestley, he designed the original Warhammer. I feel a big certain way about Games Workshop these days, but I think that his work was really important in terms of tabletop wargaming hobby and stuff like that. To my knowledge, he hasn't done any role-playing game stuff, but I might be wrong about that. He has a great book called Tabletop Wargames, which is literally just about designing tabletop wargames. I have 2 copies, so if you want to borrow one or have one,
I would love to borrow one. Yeah.
I think there's really a lot of insightful stuff that he has in there. And one of my big takeaways, because I used to play 40K, I used to play Warhammer Fantasy when I was much younger, before I really developed a political consciousness. Like one of the big takeaways that I took from his book is he's just like, throwing buckets of dice is fucking awesome. It feels it feels good to have just like 30 D6 in your hand and just to throw it on the table. And I don't think that that's really appropriate for tabletop role-playing games, because again, like that, it takes up too much time and eats away a lot. But that is why I like dice pools a lot, where it's like I can literally count my character's attributes in my hand and then toss it, throw it, see the results relatively quickly. Yeah, I mean, that's something I'm doing in Danse Macabre. It's all small dice pool based. You get a hit on a 4+, you get a miss on a 1 through a 3. There's different modifiers that you can apply to that, but it basically just at a glance you can be like, okay, I have 3 hits, I have 4 hits.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I have not liked pool games in a while. I'd also agree with, I played Warhammer 40K and thought it was, obviously there's some seductive elements to that universe, and the fantasy version, I loved the Skaven, so I always wanted to do 40K but with giant rats, so I could be a rat, with a laser. I think they mobilized, obviously a lot of elements of like both parody of right-wing government stuff, but then also it just slides into, non-parody,
That's
which is why
yeah,
we don't play it today.
yes,
But
that's the problem.
like the dice stuff, I remember not thinking was super fun. I also didn't think it got in the way. I mean, it was pretty clear. I thought it was smart given you had this whole ping pong, like we play on a ping pong table, like full of
Yeah.
figurines, and you had to manage them. And so because it's all the same kind of dice, you could put them near. Like I remember there's a physicality to it. And I just haven't played games like that in a while. Like we stopped playing before the pandemic because most of my friends had kids. So we really stopped
Yeah.
playing around a table. So I play all the time, but it's almost always through Discord. So I do think for me, that was very influential in terms of my design practice, just because it's like, well, I don't even play physical games, so I'm not designing physical games. I'm imagining that everything's theater of the mind or VTT, and I'm on a screen, which isn't good. It's just like, it became the backdrop
But
of my life even
yeah,
before,
it's
the pandemic.
there shouldn't be a value judgment attached to it. It's just it is what it is. It's just the medium that's most accessible at the
Yeah,
moment. And I mean, I think that's an interesting question that we can pose to guests too. It's like, has that changed your praxis in terms of
right.
how you're designing? Are you thinking more about VTT? Are you thinking more about streaming, or are you still designing for the table? I don't really know what the implications of any of that is, but it is interesting to me.
But I think I would never, and I also should say, in terms of dice pool games, I love the White Wolf games, and that's what I played as a kid.
Yeah.
Not more than D&D, just because people wanted to play D&D. So I played a lot of D&D, but I also loved, and I always wanted to play kind of the extended World of Darkness. So it was like mostly Vampires of the East, but you could be werewolf, you could be whatever. And that was pools of D10s, and it was relatively
Right.
small numbers. We played a lot of Trinity, so obviously the sci-fi game, and that worked because almost the opposite reason of you only needed a few D10s at a time per roll. So yeah, your sheet had all these different bubbles of D10s, but you only were rolling like 3 or 4, 7 maybe, and often not even you only had a couple. And so I think those games can work. It's hard to imagine once I got really into like, okay, what can you do with, the simplicity of you only, you're rolling just a D12 or just a D8 or whatever, and kind of comparing those as opposed to saying you have to pick one. That's why I think for our studio, we're like, okay, that'll be the kind of mechanically the thing we explore. And at the, it's like, not only does it not seem like we're not going to run out of juice anytime soon, it's kind of taken us 10 years to just get the one really good sci-fi version. Now I think it's a lot faster. We have like a couple fantasy versions coming out, but it's like there's so much there. So I would imagine basically by analogy that there'd be so much if you're like, I do pools of D6s or I do percentile, like you could kind of just always do versions of that and add twists. I think one thing I think I can speak for Ethan here to say, like, we both really interested in adding cards. And that brings us more into the physical. You can do it online, but it's so much more satisfying to flip cards on a table. I love playing poker. That's something I do still do in person. So sorry, I'm just kind of rambling about mechanics, but I think when you have your thing, it's, as you said, it's not necessarily good or bad, but it is like each of them can be used in a kind of deep way. I do think, again, there are elements that appeal more or less. Like to me, having more dice options is just inherently appealing. And I can't really explain it other than to say, like, I'm a maximalist in art, I'm a maximalist as a writer. And so obviously in terms of game design, that also is like, yeah, I want one of each of them.
Yeah. Why wouldn't you? Yeah. Something I think about a lot too is, and maybe this isn't really an issue anymore, especially with how the indie TTRPG community has been growing in the last several years. But I always think about like accessibility driving simplicity. So for Danse Macabre, it's all D6s. It's a D6 dice pool. You're maybe throwing 3 to 6 at a time, something like that. But yeah, I don't know. That was something that I was thinking about a lot, where it's like, I could do D10s, I could do D20s, I could do D8s or whatever, but something that everybody has is definitely a D6. But then again, thinking about the audience that it's going out to, they probably have 20 or 30 sets of polyhedral.
Yeah, man.
So it's kind of like, it's a little bit of a moot point, but still, I don't know. It's something that I like to think about.
I think that's noble, but I think you can only make, so this came up in a different context that I can speak to with Stillfleet, but like for us, like we do so much, we're kind of Discord focused, and eventually we'll be sort of alchemy focused, fingers crossed that's coming in September. So I think, for us, it's all there. It's like you click a button and it happens. You don't even need, like, I have a bunch of physical dice. They just sit there collecting dust, right? Because why would I roll them in front of myself when it deprives the players of the genre, if I'm jamming a game, if they see my roll and it's like, okay, now it's on you. what are you going to do? Like, you can burn all your grit, you can use some crazy power. But that aside, I also think there are real accessibility questions, and that's a really good point. But I think sometimes you do have to make the hard decisions. Like the one that I'll mention for us was the redactions. Like a few people, not many at all, but I mean, of hopefully around 1,000 people play the game, and like 2 people have been really kind of heated that our game has not just like strike through, but like text that is redacted. It's blacked out, which is a joke. And it started literally as a graphic design choice, as a kind of joke about the nature of bureaucratic documents and secret keeping, and kind of the capitalist, the sort of like technocratic class, right? The people who run Quantico, and what are they like? And so it's almost like, okay, if the game is about them running this company in space that's both really modern, but they found all these amazing ancient artifacts that are high tech, so it's this kind of weird mishmash of like genre. This will be a way to cue the reader in visually right away that these are some assholes, right? However, some people have just been like, I really want to know what's under there. And it's like, it literally was originally just jokes. Now, of course, I do try to write little bon mot, of like fun lore kind of things, but it's nothing like, you literally can never read any of them and play the game and it works exactly the same. None of them are rules, none of them matter. And you can find them all in the PDFs. You just would open the PDF and like select the text and you can see it. But that has annoyed a couple people to the point where they're like, I'll never play your game, I hate it. And I'm like, all right, like, fair enough, that is an accessibility thing, but we made a choice. And we all like check in and we're like, we're sticking by it, like we think it's rad, so like clearly that makes it less accessible. But I kind of feel like in the age when most people have access to PDF readers for free easily, like it's not that inaccessible,
Well, you're also not redacting anything that would change accessibility to play. That's the thing that I'm tripping up on, where it's like, I don't personally think that's an accessibility issue, because it's using graphic design to do world building or lore building, right? Like that's
right.
That's kind of the point of it. So it's not like you're redacting rules or making like limiting people's access to the game itself.
But I mean, one can make that. I mean, I can understand if your thing is like, hey, maybe I don't have great vision, or I'm not great at computers, or it's a pain in the ass. Like, there's a counter argument. It's just, I guess my point is like, sometimes you do have to just say, well, we've done it this way and you can do it a different way if you want. There's other games that do different ways, and I think it's a spectrum, because I think you could imagine a game where like, to play the game, you have to buy a special object that costs $100. And in that case, will you play it? Will I play it? Probably not. We'll probably look at it and be like, yeah, cool, but I don't really want to, like, in addition to like I'm saying, like, you buy the book and then you still have to buy something none of us own, to your point about like tools. I guess that's how Warhammer, and I think also as you get older, it's like, oh yeah, it looks fun, but also, do I really want to spend that money?
Well, and I mean, we could get into a whole thing about Games Workshop's pricing schemes, and I mean, there's like a whole. It is the biggest fucking scam. It's like I don't want to go like daytime radio host on this or anything, but like, it's a fucking scam.
More than Magic the Gathering, or similar to?
I would say same but different, maybe. Like, Magic, in a lot of trading card games, TCGs tend to deal more in rarity than Games Workshop does with its miniatures. But what Games Workshop does is they base pricing on in-game, and I mean, this is kind of true for Magic, but I think there's a different economy happening with Magic or other TCGs at the same time, where it's like, you want to like collect the Charizard and whatever.
Right.
It's pay to play with Warhammer, which of course it is, right? You have to buy the miniatures, you have to buy the paints, you have to do all that stuff. But then they scale it up, and so like individual characters or units that are particularly powerful in whatever their current rule set or whatever their current update is, tend to be priced 10, 20, 30% higher than other units that you're going to end up buying.
Right.
And that's how you can get an individual plastic model that literally takes maybe 2 pence for Games Workshop to manufacture, because they own the molds, they own the company, or they manufacture everything in-house, right? So they have an incredibly streamlined production system. Maybe it takes 2 pence for them to produce this little plastic miniature that's about 2 to 3 inches tall, and they'll charge you 50 or 60 or $70 for it, based on the in-game stats and lore for it.
Crazy.
So it's like, if you want to have a competitive army, which I think most people that play that game do. Like I know very few people that play 40K casually. It's a really competitive scene. You gotta fucking shell out for, what materially amounts to nothing. I'm
not competitive, so that's one reason TTRPGs always appeal. Like I want to explore, not
Same. I mean, I love tabletop wargaming stuff more for the hobby side of things, frankly. Like I like showing off painting. I like doing the modeling and stuff like that.
Right.
I'm fucking bad at playing the game. I always lose. And after a while, it's like, well, I don't want to be in a tournament. I don't want to, it's just embarrassing.
Right.
Outside of the, problematic, other, myriad problematic stuff.
Oh yeah, but even right, and so you can abstract out each of these kind of dimensions of game design. So you could say we could do leftist Warhammer, where it's whatever punk hammer, and it's completely different in that sense, but it's still like, it's your point about the real world economy being related to the diegetic kind of power, and just like, okay, well, I still don't have the money, so even if and a lot of, again, politics aside, I've had fun at a few times playing Warhammer, and there are aspects of it that are fun. I also felt like, wow, I'm really bad at this, and this whatever is very arcane, and people are arguing about like lines of sight a lot, but but I can imagine it being fun. And I think so. I will say, like, I think this is Grant Howitt did a version called Grimlight, where you're playing only small squads, and it's all about kind of making mutants. So you're using the different pieces, the sort of cheapy pieces they produce, to make your own kind of aliens or far future humans with weird kind of tech. And then you're playing these little squads, and that's meant to facilitate, I think, in addition to, it's a cool looking kind of way to run a war game. It's also like, you don't have to buy that much stuff, and you're buying kind of scraps and making your own. So it sort of assumes you like super glue a lot. And to your point, the hobby aspects, you like, painting, making your little guys. I also feel like I'm a little lazy and not that good at the art side. Like I'm a writer, so it makes a lot of sense that to me, the very abstract, like mind stuff was always very appealing. Like, oh, I can just write a scenario and you imagine the dragon or whatever.
That's on you. That's on you.
I don't know. I mean, I can
theater of the mind.
I can describe it beautifulely, but like, I'm not in your head. I don't know. I don't want to. I can't draw it.
There is a lot of really cool indie miniatures agnostic war games out there that I think do a similar thing. Small squadron based, all that kind of stuff. Much more accessible. That is out there. That might be interesting to talk to some of those designers.
Yeah.
As well.
I would be totally down. And I would be really down to play a lot of this stuff. A lot of it is not, it's like, it's very funny. And I this might be, a whole episode, your history, my history, like just as, I'm guessing around the same age, maybe coming up in some of the same worlds, but in different cities. And how do you arrive at like the kinds of games we like now versus, all the other games out there, video games and CCGs and tabletop war games, as you're mentioning, being kind of major competitors to just any version of TTRPGs. Mm-hmm. But I will say, a lot of times in my life, it's not been a very conscious, it hasn't been like, I will never play this type of game again. It's more just like going toward what I liked and what my friends liked and how we could spend time together, kind of pre them having kids, pre-pandemic. And now we're in a world where for my specific friend group, that's cut off certain avenues. But then with running a kind of company, it's like opened up all, just meeting amazing randos who are really great, who also have very specific times they can play and ways they can play. But I think this podcast can be an amazing resource for both of us to just try a bunch of stuff we wouldn't normally try and talk about it and give it like a very, like, I think we're on the same page about like, give it a real shot and don't hate on it. Just like, here's what it is. Which I think probably other podcasts do. But again, I don't know how many of them are coming from a place of like, I want to do this all day. This is all I do, kind of the click and clack vibe we were talking about. So thanks for listening to Why We Roll. Why We Roll is a podcast about designing tabletop role-playing games. I'm Wythe Marschall.
I'm Chris Pickett. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening to Why We Roll. Our theme music is by the brilliant Sam Tyndall and Arpline. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
You can find us on Twitch and what used to be Twitter at Why We Roll, and on Instagram at whyweroll.pod.
You can find out more about Danse Macabre at timespaceplace.itch.io/dance-macabre.
You can find out more about Stillfleet at stillfleet.com. Thanks for listening.
Every hero strikes out on their adventure for a different reason.
To prove myself worthy of my mother's praise.
To write my own story and discover who I really am.
To prove to my family that I am more than they believe me to be.
To revive the god that has chosen me.
But when the fragile balance of the world is in jeopardy, and sinister forces move in the darkness, heroes will be tested, pushed to their limits and beyond. And it will be left to them to determine if they are up to the task. There is a darkness rising. Will they be able to overcome the challenges and meet this evil head-on?
For my god.
For my story.
For my freedom.
For the world.
To restore the balance. Modified Role Season 2, The Chronicles of Erin, a D&D 5e actual play podcast. New season, new characters, new story. Find us on all the usual podcasting apps or at modifiedrole.com.